feel like if you want to be a modern fitness influencer, you need a starter pack. The starter pack is AG1, rucking, fasting or ketogenic diets, and goddamn cold plunges. Now I've already made videos about the other ones, so it must be time to talk about cold plunges. Now there are some big claims about ice baths and the health benefits that they give people, but let's really dig into what the truths are and what the myths are so you can figure out if it's right for you and actually how best to do it. The biggest one has to be that it increases metabolism and general well-being, and does so through the activation of what's called brown adipose tissue, which is a more metabolic kind of fat than the normal sort of body fat we have, which is called white adipose tissue. Also said that they increase dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin levels, which sounds like a really good thing. Probably the first time that people started looking at cold immersion seriously was when the Titanic sank April 14, 1912. Fast forward a bit from there, and the Nazis went crazy in World War II, doing this thing called the Dachau hypothermia experiment. They experimented on about 300 people in water temperatures from 2 to 12 degrees for various lengths of time, being both clothed and unclothed, and then they used a variety of ways to re-warm them, including putting them in boiling water. I'm just going to stop it there and say if you want to Google that, you can. I'm not going to go into the mechanics too much further, but suffice to say, as gruesome as those experiments are, they actually led the way in cold water research for a number of years. Water in general is actually really dangerous. There's about 372,000 drowning deaths in the US every year. It's the third leading non-injury cause of death in the US. So there's some stuff we need to be concerned about when we're talking about water in general. When we add cold and water together, there is a thing called cold shock that comes from it. And it's actually got a host of problems associated with it, including raising your heart rate, creating arrhythmia and tachycardia. So there's a few things we want to be careful of when we're combining these two things together. Some of these heart issues, the arrhythmia and the tachycardia, can actually become chronic, as in they're not just present when you're immersed in cold water, they can be something that you cause to yourself from being immersed in cold water that you then have to deal with for the rest of your life. So you really want to be careful when you're going into this stuff and make sure you understand the risks, as well as make sure you're prepared for your body to go through this, and maybe you even need to ask your doctor's advice before you begin. For people already at cardiac risk, you need to understand that immersion into cold water will raise your blood pressure and it raises your ventilation rate, and this can create problems for you if you've already got some heart issues. When we add breathing into the mix, it becomes even more problematic because of this thing called shallow water blackout. In short, shallow water blackout can happen to anyone in any body of water, regardless of how shallow it is, which is why it's called shallow water blackout. It's heightened when you add in hyperventilation. So if you think about famous groups like Wim Hof, who run these workshops involving both cold water immersion and breathing at the same time, there was actually a class action lawsuit against Wim Hof regarding the use of these hyperventilation techniques, cold water, and subsequent deaths. Now that lawsuit has been squashed, but it shows you that enough people had problems from it that there was a class action lawsuit regarding breathing and cold water practices combined. The final part of this is that the decrease in inflammation that comes from being in cold water, if you're doing this post-workout, will actually slow down muscle growth. So if mass and hypertrophy is one of the things you're chasing, we need to make sure that we're not cold plunging straight after a workout, because it's actually going to stop the growth mechanism from forcing that adaptation in your body. That gets us to brown adipose tissue. This is a metabolically active kind of fat that's thought to help be as part of your thermoregulation system, along with other things like sweating, skin temperature, things like that. In people who swim in winter, they found lower concentration of brown adipose tissue, which means lower core temperature. This in turn leads to higher energy expenditure. So if you're thinking that this might be a good way to lose fat, there is a possibility of that because of the need to temperature regulate after you've lost this active body fat through swimming in cold water. Like with anything, think about what your end goals are. For me, I go on long hikes at high altitude in cold environments. If I reduce my core temperature, that means I increase the amount of food I need to stay warm. That means I need to carry it with me, and that means I'm creating a bunch of headaches for myself simply through what might be cold plunging, and reducing my core temperature is actually going to have a knock-on effect for all my other activities. So make sure you have your priorities and your goals lined out clearly, rather than just adding this thing ad hoc and thinking it's always going to benefit you. It might benefit you in some cases. On top of that, you might be trying it thinking it'll help you acclimate to the cold, when actually the reverse is true, because it's going to make you need more energy to stay warm because you've had this loss of brown adipose tissue. So again, make sure you prioritize your goals, think about what the purpose is and whether this is actually going to be beneficial for what your end goal is. Now the real question everyone needs to know, do you need a dedicated cold plunge pool? Do I have to go out and buy a 10,000 Rogue custom made cold tub, or can I just maybe stand in the cold shower? Look, the shower works, but it's not as good as immersion in cold water if you're after all of the benefits. But that doesn't mean you need to go crazy and go and buy 20 bags of ice to put into the water with you. Studies show that the impact of water between 10 degrees Celsius and 15 degrees Celsius is no different than 5 degrees Celsius. In other words, there's just no reason to make yourself even colder because it's not going to bring any extra benefits. The only advantage in having colder water is that you might be able to stay in there shorter. But as you'll see later, the temperature of the water and how you respond to it is a large part of whether or not you're actually going to get all of the benefits that everyone talks about, or if you make it too stressful for yourself and need to stop anyway. Now what the studies show is that you need an accumulated time of about 11 minutes weekly. You don't need to do 20 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day in 2-degree water. That's actually going to bring no extra benefits than 11 minutes total in water between 10 and 15 degrees Celsius. The key point, when you start to shiver, it's time to get out. Because the point you start shivering is the point your body starts working anaerobically, and then all of the processes, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, all of these things that we're trying to make happen from cold plunging are going to stop happening for you the moment you start working anaerobically. So as you can see, in really cold water, while you might only have to be in there for a shorter period of time, you will start shivering earlier. The moment you start shivering earlier, you've pushed yourself into fight or flight mode, and that's actually increasing stress in your body, not decreasing stress. And it's this stress that I need to talk about the most. This is a hidden thing that most people don't realize about these things. Cold plunges add stress. If you're already stressed because you're overweight, because you're drinking alcohol, because you're not sleeping enough, because you've done a hard HIIT workout, because your boss has yelled at you, because you've had a fight with your wife, all of these things are impacting the amount of stress you're carrying. Jumping in a tub of cold water might be the straw that breaks the camel's back, or drowns him in this case. Deliberately putting yourself into further stress could be a massive problem. When you think about your reaction to stress, think about something crazy you did. Maybe you went bungee jumping. Maybe you nearly got in a fight, or you escaped a car crash. That massive flood of stress hormones that you had immediately after that, and how alive and energized you feel. And that's how people talk about ice baths. Oh, I feel fantastic, I feel amazing. Yes, because your body is protecting you by flooding you with stress hormones. If you're already flooded with stress hormones because of your poor lifestyle, your poor diet, and your poor exercise habits, this could be too much for you. And when it comes to the best way to do this, it's much better to be immersed in the water rather than just have it showered on you. But there's a step above that, and that's to be completely underwater rather than just sitting in the water. So that means my head needs to go underwater too. And the reason for that is when our head is submerged, it triggers this thing called the mammalian dive reflex. Now the dive reflex is the opposite to cold plunging. Cold plunging is a fight or flight stress response. The mammalian dive reflex actually sends you to the parasympathetic rest and digest side of your nervous system and calms the body down. So if you're looking for reducing stress while cold plunging, you need to go completely underwater. And the difference is where being immersed in cold water with your head above water increases heart rate, increases blood pressure. Being completely submerged underwater does the opposite. It reduces heart rate, it reduces blood pressure, it has a reduction in vagal tone, which is basically a sign of how stressed your system is. It has a bunch of positive effects on soothing the nervous system. This dive reflex acts in exactly the same way on our system as meditation, relaxing activities like yin yoga, or even just going for gentle walks in nature. So what's the best use for cold plunges? Why would we actually choose to use this? The number one reason I always give people is that if you're a climate controlled individual, it might be nice to put a little bit of environmental stress in your life. If you sit in a soft chair in a climate controlled environment and you drive your climate controlled car to your climate controlled office, and then you reverse all that to come back home and lie on your soft couch, you probably need some hardship in your life. Adding in some kind of cold therapy might be a great way to start getting some mental and physical robustness built into your life. But there's no need to go and sit in 2-degree water for 20 minutes to accomplish it. You might start that with something as simple as a 30-second cold-only shower at the end of every shower. Again, the total amount of time of cold exposure you need is only 11 minutes per week. That's 1.5 minutes, 7 days a week. So you could do all your washing, turn the cold on, finish your shower with cold only, and that could be the entire amount of cold therapy you need for the week to get all the possible benefits you can. As you build tolerance for cold, you might decide then to start actually getting into cold immersion, but again, it's not going to bring about huge amounts of extra benefits. The last real reason to use it is that cold is a terrific anti-inflammatory. We've known this for years. We've put ice packs on injuries. Cold therapy is exactly the same as putting an ice pack, but on your entire body. If you've got a body that is riddled with joint soreness, arthritis, maybe because you've gone way too hard for too long, like a lot of my military friends, then cold baths can be a great way to reduce whole body inflammation. That is a terrific source for you to be able to move pain-free for the rest of your day. But outside of these few examples, I can't see any real benefit in cold plunging. I've never deliberately gone and been cold, hungry, or wet. I'm certainly not about to start now. I can find other ways to add discomfort and resilience into my life without needing to make myself uncomfortable every single time I have a shower.